Our last video on water deals with something known as Water Quality Index, and we'll talk a bit about what that actually means and then get into a little bit more specifics. A Water Quality Index, or WQI, is a series of tests that are done on a body of water, usually surface water, to determine its overall quality. No single test can tell us exactly all the information that we need. One part of the water, there might be one quality that's good, another that's bad, but overall, all the different tests combined, how do they actually contribute to the overall water quality? On a WQI, the higher the score, the better the water quality. The tests that are conducted for a water quality test are pH, nitrates, phosphates, dissolved oxygen, biochemical oxygen demand, also known as BOD, turbidity, fecal coliform, total dissolved solids, and temperature change. I have these listed in two categories as far as chemical and physical. You might also want to add a third column. Really, the fecal coliform is a little bit more of a biological test that's measuring the bacteria that will be in the water, so that's more biological. And the biological oxygen demand kind of crosses between the two in terms of biological and chemical. We measure the oxygen, the dissolved oxygen, that after the biological matter in the water has had an opportunity to react with that water. The WQI is a weighted scale. It has some factors weighted higher than others because some are more important than others when it comes to the overall stream quality or surface water quality. Which ones do you think are most important? If you guessed dissolved oxygen and fecal coliform, you would be right. You win a prize. Go treat yourself to some ice cream. The dissolved oxygen is very important because living things, fish, all the other animals in the water need that dissolved oxygen. So the more dissolved oxygen, the more life you're going to have in the water. The fecal coliform is important because if you have too much of that, that's considered a pollutant, and that greatly impacts the all the materials in the water. Next, we'll look at each one of these tests individually. The dissolved oxygen is a measure of just the O2 molecules that are in the water. The more oxygen you have, there's more oxygen going to be in cold water than there is in warm water. As water warms, the molecules of water move faster and they kind of push the oxygen molecules actually out of the water, so it becomes less saturated. As a result, usually the dissolved oxygen is measured by a percent saturation. It's a little bit of a tricky graph to interpret to measure the percent saturation. We'll show you that in class. Also, faster moving streams usually have a higher oxygen content, and that's because as the water bubbles and perhaps goes over rocks and just travels a lot faster, it usually splashes around a bit. It kind of traps that air that it might be coming over and actually pulls the oxygen out of the air nearby as it moves down the stream. Typically, if there's a low amount of oxygen, that's going to signal that you have some polluted water. The next test is the fecal coliform test. This is a test of any bacteria that would be formed from the feces of warm-blooded animals. So this could be from runoff from farms or animal waste, untreated sewage, that sort of issues with the water. Fecal coliform itself is not a really hazardous type of bacteria, but usually if there's fecal coliform present, there's usually other more harmful bacteria present, and that's usually the real danger. pH, as you know, measures the acidity of water. The scale for pH is 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral. And the reason pH is so important for this type of test is that most species can only tolerate a small range of pH. So if the pH does vary significantly, animals are going to die as a result. Next is the BOD test, as we mentioned, biochemical oxygen demand. This is another one hard for students to understand sometimes. What it measures is the need for oxygen as matter decomposes. So if a body of water has a lot of organic matter in it, over a period of time, that organic matter decomposes. And to decompose, it needs aerobic bacteria. So to take this test, you actually measure the dissolved oxygen, take another sample of water, cover it completely so there's no other like photosynthesis or anything else going on that would possibly change the amount of oxygen in another way. And then you measure the dissolved oxygen again after 5 days. If you have a high biological oxygen demand, that indicates that you have a significant amount of plant growth in the water and that the plants are going to use up a lot of the oxygen. If the plants are using a lot of oxygen, then there's going to be less oxygen for the other living organisms like fish and worms and everything else that needs oxygen. Temperature is also a factor here, and it's not really temperature, but temperature change. I should probably point that out. Things in a stream need a consistent temperature. You don't want the temperature to change drastically from time to time, place to place. And usually the only reason that the temperature would change is if someone is adding either very warm water or very cold water into a stream or a river. This might occur if you had some sort of industry that had really warm water, like a power plant or something like that, a thermoelectric plant, and if they were depositing some of their wastewater into a river and that water wasn't cooled down before they did so, then that might increase that temperature in that area. But they do need to have a consistent temperature. Temperature also affects, as we mentioned, the dissolved oxygen, the amount of photosynthesis going on, a couple other things as well. The next test is phosphates. The PO4 with a -3 charge is what we're actually measuring here. It's a polyatomic ion. Phosphates are needed for plant growth. You might remember from that DNA molecule's got some phosphorus in it. If you have too much phosphorus, that's going to cause excessive plant growth. And as we just mentioned, excessive plant growth increases the BOD. Increasing the BOD drops the dissolved oxygen. You can see how these factors are all tying together here. Another test is for nitrates, NO3 with a -1. Nitrates are also needed for plant growth, but again, too much can cause some health problems. It can also help promote plant growth. Nitrate fertilizers are often what you put on your lawn to get your grass to grow nice and bright green all summer long. Turbidity is a measure of something called total suspended solids. So sometimes you might hear turbidity referred to as the TSS. This measures the water clarity, and you can maybe picture this if you've been to a beach up in the northern Atlantic or even Myrtle Beach, somewhere around that area, the Outer Banks. That water is quite a bit cloudy, and if you go to a beach in Florida, you can see pretty much your feet whenever you're in the water. So the more turbidity you have, the more suspended particles. So a beach up at the Outer Banks has a lot of suspended particles. A beach down in Florida, the water there has less suspended particles. This is measured in two ways. If you do have a deep enough water sample, you can use this device known as a Secchi disc. It's basically just a circle with divided into 4 segments with alternating black and white discs, pie-shaped wedges to it, and just drop that down in the water. With the shallow stream that we'll be doing, it's pretty hard to use that Secchi disc with any values to it. So we do have an electronic meter that we'll be using for our turbidity test. Another measurement that's important is total solids. This is all of dissolved and undissolved materials in a sample. So this could be quite a few things. This is going to be things where you have, in our region, we have a lot of calcium in our water. We have a lot of iron, nitrates, phosphates, magnesium. All these are usually dissolved minerals that water has dissolved from all the rocks. Some of it is runoff, again, those nitrates and phosphates, etc. This does affect the taste, but some dissolved ions are actually needed in the water for just what we use it for. We need iron, so it's good to have some iron in water, but certainly we don't want too much. Calcium, magnesium. And if you look at your bottled water, you see oftentimes they do add a little bit of some type of ion to it because it makes it taste a little bit better. So back to the WQI. Each test corresponds to a specific what we call Q value. So you'll conduct each one of these tests, and with each test you'll come up with the Q value by measuring the, take the measurement that you get from your data, multiply it by the factor, the weighting factor, and that gets you a Q value. What we'll do in class is take the overall class average. So we're going to have 4 groups probably, each measuring each one of these tests. and we'll do the class average to get the overall Q value for the stream. We'll talk more in class about some of the specific devices we'll be using for this. Several of these tests, we have some test kits where you basically follow the directions, mix chemical A with chemical B, read the directions, wait a certain amount of time, look for a color change, interpret the chart. And other tests, quite a few of them actually, probably 4 or 5, we have the vernier equipment that you may have used in chem or bio class, and we'll actually use some electronic probes to measure dissolved oxygen, turbidity, total solids, and a couple others.